Good morning. It's great to be together again. My name's Joel. Welcome. If you're joining us online, thank you for joining us. If you're here in the room, thanks for being here. I'm just gonna come straight clean with everything. I've got a bit of a geeky confession to make. And it's not, I've got lots of them, but anyway, my real geeky confession is this. I like the film The Planet of the Apes, okay? Yeah, I'm talking like even from the 1968 Charlton Heston original film. It did win an Oscar, by the way. Even from the original film, 1968, I've seen all 5 of them. They slightly go down in budget in the original wave, and then there was the Tim Burton reboot, and then there was the other 3 reboots that have been done as well. Anyway, I like it. A bit of a geek, if you like, And some of you might have actually seen this film when it first came out. Believe it or not, I was not born in 1968, but I did see it as a young child numerous times, including the short animated series, which you may or may not have even known was there. But the one thing about this film, you might not know this, but a geek like me would know this. This was the first film to have a proper surprise ending. Okay, it was the first film with a shock and unexpected ending. So see, nobody knew what was going to happen at the end. And if you haven't seen it, I won't give it away, but don't look on the screen because you've already got the spoiler. But anyway, it was the first film to do this like surprise ending thing. And now it happens much more commonly now. But at the time, it was huge. And what happened was at the very end of the movie, the final scene, something happens. And the thing that happens changes your perspective on the whole story that you've just watched. Because the thing at the end all of a sudden changes the whole story that happened previously. Now, you might have seen, there's some other films that do this, of course, really famous ones. You've got like The Sixth Sense, remember Bruce Willis, if you've seen that one? I see dead people and all of that. If you've not seen that film, again, it's another one, surprise ending at the end. Another really well-known one, of course, is the one with Kevin Spacey, The Usual Suspects, and Kaiser Soze. Again, if you've not seen those, something happens in the final scenes of both of those movies, which changes all of the movie previously. It changes the whole story. And in reality, the Christian faith is actually a bit more like that. Because the Christian faith only makes sense when we read it from the end of the story back. You see, it's only when you read it backwards does everything begin to actually make sense as to why this Christian faith even still exists and still goes on. And if you think about it like this, see, last week was Easter, and it should have been, we remember the weekend and whatever when Jesus died, and it should have been the end of the story. It should have been the absolute final. It should have been the end credits come rolling up, lights come back on in the cinema, and you drop your empty popcorn box on your way out and go home. I mean, it should have been the total end of the film, the end of the story. And if you were there, think about it. If you were one of the Jewish leaders who were there, because what happened was the Jewish leaders conspired to get rid of Jesus because he just was so annoying, and he just got under their skin, it was on their nerves, and he was upsetting the apple cart, he was messing up the status quo. And what happened was the Jewish leaders conspired to get rid of Jesus. And all of a sudden, their political maneuvers, their economic, everything that they did to conspire, they finally got rid of Jesus. He's finally dead. So they're probably having a party. For them, this is it. Cool, we can move on. We're back in power now. We're back in, the way things are. And if you're one of the Roman soldiers, if you're one of the Roman troops, it just would have been another normal day for you. The Romans kept control of people, and one of the ways they kept control of people is by corporal public punishment. And if you're one of those Roman soldiers that was there that day, all you did was just another day at the office, just putting somebody else to death who's an annoying person in your areas that you control. That's just normal. This is what you did. And so, they just carried on with their lives. They thought this was it. Story's over, moving on. And there's this really interesting thing, and I'm going to read a quote from Andy Stanley, and this is what he says, because the same thing was true for the followers of Jesus. When Jesus was crucified, there were no Christians. There was no church. there was no Bible, and there were no believers. The story was over. When Jesus was crucified, the only thing that was left was dozens of broken-hearted Galileans who were just overwhelmed with confusion. The end has happened. The story's over. Final credits. And the authorities wanted it to be over. They wanted all of its nonsense to stop. So they publicly tortured and killed the leader. And if you just put it into perspective, this all happened in 24 hours. So what were you doing 24 hours ago? Yesterday was Saturday morning, you woke up, I don't know, did you think, I'm just going to lie in bed a bit longer? Did you think I've got to get the lawn mowed? Oh, man, it's colder than I was hoping it was going to be. I've got to get these things done. What did you do 24 hours ago? You see, in 24 hours for the disciples, Jesus was arrested, he was put on trial, he was beaten, tortured, and put to death, all within one 24-hour window. That's how quickly everything changed for them. That's how final and unexpected and shocking and disruptive the whole event was. In 24 hours, everything changed. They thought that was the end of the story. And you can read the first-hand accounts of Jesus' followers. If there's a book called the Bible, which is a collection of lots of books put together. And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are first-hand accounts of the story of the life of Jesus that people wrote who were witnesses there with Jesus. And you can read those yourselves, and they describe what it was like for them, what it was for them as the early followers. And they talk about themselves as doubters and cynics, and they don't describe themselves as courageous people. They talk about themselves as frightened people, stuck people. They even describe themselves as deciding to start over. Some of them say, we're going to go back to fishing. And a group of people decided to do that because they used to be fishermen before. You see, they thought the story was over. They didn't think it was going to carry on. But for some reason, it was not the end of the story. Jesus was put to death by two very powerful systems. Some of these types of systems still exist in the world today, but in that time, you had the ancient Jewish sort of religious system, and you had the Roman Empire. Two systems. You've got this religious political system, Jewish religious leaders, and you got the Roman Empire. Two of the most powerful systems that were in place at that time. And those two powerful systems smashed Jesus. They conspired together and they put Jesus to death. The system killed him. Okay? And then what's interesting, if you think about it, and you don't have to be a Christian to know this, you don't have to be a follower of Jesus to be curious about this, because sociologists, those who study culture, and historians also are curious about this fact. Because why in the world was a nobody put to death from a nowhere place in the world by the most powerful systems in the world? But the one system that has stood the test of time is not the religious system, and it's not the Roman Empire. Both of those didn't do anything. But all of a sudden, this nobody from nowhere, with a group of no-named followers, uneducated people, for some reason, that is a global phenomenon, and the church is still advancing and marching onwards. Why in the world is Christianity spread around the world? Why did that survive? Why? It's really crazy. They want to discover why, and historians have to honestly wrestle with that question. And a lot of people have, and a number of them have come to faith because they realize the only reason why is because something must have happened, that it wasn't the end of the story. You know, why isn't Jesus remembered as a liar? Let's just be really honest for a moment. Like, if you were with Jesus and he said some of these things, which he said to his followers when he was around, when he was with them in person, he said stuff like this. He said, I will be with you always, even to the end of the days. He said this. He said, I will not leave you as orphans. He said this, I will never leave you or forsake you. He said, I go to prepare a place for you. He said, I'm going to build my church and the gates of hell will not stand, will not survive, will not prevail against it. Except the person who told you that is dead. You see, for these first followers, okay, you're not with us. You said you'd be with us forever. You said we wouldn't be forsaken. You said we wouldn't be left alone. And we are feeling forsaken. We are feeling left alone. We do feel like orphans. And how can you prepare anything for us when you're not even here to do so? And by all accounts, it looks like the gates of hell have already come together and put you to death. You see, Jesus even started off his whole mission when he first started his public ministry. He goes into a synagogue, which is where they gathered for their religious gatherings, and he gets this scroll out, which is how, and he reads this verse. He reads a passage from an Old Testament prophecy. And this is what Jesus says. This is what he says in front of these people in this little village synagogue. This is what he says. He says this. He says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, the sight to the blind, the freedom to the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." This is how he started off. This was his MO. This was his launch party. And this is what he proclaims was his plan. What was his purpose? And then it looks like, well, he did okay for a while. You did some of those things. You did okay for a bit. But dead men don't do much proclaiming. And dead men don't do much liberating. And dead men don't do much healing. And dead men don't do much life-changing. And dead men don't do any of this stuff. When's the last time you heard a dead man proclaim anything? See, why in the world do we think Jesus is not a liar? If something didn't happen, Jesus is just a liar. He's just a liar. If something didn't happen. Because all of his promises are a bit like some of those pop psychologists who say those sugar candy-coated phrases that work really well on a magnet that you put on your fridge or maybe in a greeting card, but they don't have any substance to them because they don't really change your life. See, if Jesus wasn't really who he said he was, then basically he's nothing more than a greeting card writer. He just writes nice things to make you feel nice, feel good, and that's all he is. He should be nothing more. Nothing more. So why isn't he remembered this way? Why isn't he remembered as such a liar? Why did a bunch of nobodies give the rest of their life for him? It is a good question. Why? Why did these followers go from being full of fear to being full of courage? What happened? Well, why did they go from being full of doubt to being full of certainty? How did they go from being full of uncertainty and aimlessness to having purpose in life? How did they go from being shamed to being full of hope? How did they go from being in dark places to full of confidence? What happened? So what was it? Why? You don't even have to be a follower of Jesus to understand that that's a really good question. And as I say, sociologists and historians who study religion, study movements, study people, think, well, why? What happened? What was the only reason? What happened for them to be able to do this? And the one reason that they had courage, the one reason they had determination, the one reason they had purpose and joy and passion and didn't live in fear, and they could face whatever is coming their way, no matter what it is, the only reason they could do that was because Jesus came back to life. It's the only logical explanation. It's the only experiential explanation, which means it's the only thing that makes sense from a sort of intellectual academic point of view, but it's the only thing that explains it from an experiential point of view. Because why else would they have behaved differently? Why else would they have done things differently? It's the only logical answer. And this guy, Paul writes this. He writes this in Corinthians. It's in 1 Corinthians 15, and he says this to a group of people in Corinth. He says, if Jesus was not raised from the dead, then our preaching is worthless. and your faith is nothing. 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 He's saying that if something didn't happen, all of us should really stop wasting our time on a Sunday morning. If something didn't happen, we should really just pack up our bags and go home and, my goodness, do something else. Because I don't know about you, I do have other things I could be doing. I have a lawn that probably needs mowed. I've got a wall that wants to be painted. And it's been asking me to paint it for a long time. And I'm just saying, shut up. I'm not going to listen to you right now. I'm sure you've got lots of things. I'm sure you've got people you might want to see. I'm sure you've got sporting events you might want to go to. I'm sure you've got stuff that you could do. And in fact, you know what? If nothing happened, then why don't you go and do those things? Because that would be a much better use of your time. Oh, if you're watching online, why don't you just stop this now and go ahead onto Netflix and just watch something else? Because Paul is saying, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, the whole thing is worthless and pointless. There's no point. He's saying there's not even any point of him preaching or trying to tell other people, and there's no point you putting any faith in it because it's pointless and worthless. 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 There's no point in doing it. And the thing is, if there's no hope for the future, then you might as well, you could either give up now, or you could just do whatever you like. Maybe you should adopt this strategy in life. You could start about the age of 14 or 15, so some of you might have missed a few years already, but I think about the age of 14 or 15, you could just decide, I'm going to live my life however I want to live my life. And if you start at that age, I bet you could get a good 60, maybe 65 years run of just doing whatever in the world you like for you. Because if there's no point, if there's nothing bigger in this world, if there's nothing bigger in life, then basically you should just do whatever you can to please yourself, however you want, whenever you want. Yeah, because there's no point. There's nothing else. And if this life is all there is, then there is no hope or certainty for the future. So what's the point of doing anything that would be for the future? And if you haven't even yet started to have children, some of us it's too late, so sorry. But if you haven't yet had kids, why even have children? Why even do something that's so future-filled? Why do something that's hope-filled? If they're going to grow up in a world where there is no real purpose in life, what's the point of doing it anyway? What's the point? If the future's bleak, what's the point? What's the point of being generous? I would encourage you now, you should cancel your standing order. If you support New Life Church financially, you should probably cancel it now. Because what's the point? If you serve on a rota, you should probably email me tomorrow morning and say, I would like to come off the rota. Because there's no point serving. There's no point being generous. There's no point doing anything with your time for anybody else. If life is worthless and pointless, there's no point doing anything for anybody except yourself. That's the extreme connection, if you like, the direction. But for these followers, the early followers would say this. They would say the only thing that makes life worth living is the fact that Jesus came back to life. That's the only thing that makes life worth living, because Jesus came back to life. That's what they would say. The only thing. The resurrection was the event that happened, which reorientated, reinvigorated, changed their perspective. It was the surprise ending at the end of the film. And when you reached that surprise ending, everything else that happened beforehand, you see totally differently. Everything else that happened previously in that story, all of a sudden, is seen with a different set of eyes, a totally different perspective. And this is our theme. This is what we're going to be looking at for the next sort of 5 or 6 weeks. We're just going to park here and just rest on this theme. See, last week was Easter, and Kevin said it during worship this morning. It's not just the one event, if you like. And Easter is that day where we could, enjoy a long bank holiday. You get the Friday and the Monday off. You get the extra days off, and maybe you buy lots of hot cross buns, and maybe you had a nice roast dinner, and maybe Easter is just the thing that's just a nice weekend, and you get to overindulge in chocolate, and no one tells you off for it. You can have chocolate for breakfast, and you don't get told off. It's nice, Try it again on Wednesday morning and just see what happens. Why don't you go into work on Wednesday with a Easter egg and just see what people do, you know what I mean? They might forgive you now, but do it in a week's time or a month's time and see what they say. You know, for that Easter weekend, Easter can just become this thing that happens and then we just move on. But really, Easter is more than a holiday. Easter is so much more than a holiday, and it's so much more than something that we just remember or as a ritual. Because Easter is the one moment, it reminds us of the one moment that makes every moment in our lives meaningful. It's the one moment. Now, I'm gonna properly go out on a limb here. I don't know some of you. I don't know some of your stories. Some of you I do. And I don't know any of you who are watching online. I don't know where you're at. But I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to make just an assumption about your life. I'm going to guess that you want to live life with less fear. I'm just going to guess that you want to live life with more hope. I'm going to guess that you want to live life with purpose. I'm just going to guess that you actually would love to have a perspective in life that somehow, no matter what comes in the future, you know that you'll be able to face it. I'm just guessing here. You don't even have to be a follower of Jesus. I'm just guessing. I'm just guessing that when you have children or the children that you do have, I'm just going to guess that you want them to be able to face the future with hope and strength. I'm just guessing. Maybe you'd like to know that no matter what you've done in the past, it's not going to hold you back for the future. Maybe you'd like to live in such a way that you know beyond a shadow of a doubt somebody loves you and you didn't do anything to deserve it or earn it. You didn't have to prove yourself. You didn't have to buy it. You didn't have to sell yourself for it. It just is. I'm just guessing that maybe you would want that for your life. Maybe you'd like to be able to live with your head high and know that there's nothing that can shame you anymore. There's no story from your past that can be brought up that would just cover you in shame. I'm guessing that that's how you'd like to live. And see, that's how these early followers lived. Something must have happened for them to be able to live like this. How in the world could they face the future with hope? This is why the resurrection is so important. This is why we're going to be doing this series. Because this series, understanding that because Jesus lives, because he lives, you can face the future. You can face tomorrow. And it only makes sense because of the surprise ending. This changes how you understand everything about the story. And this guy, Paul, who I mentioned a moment ago, the same Paul who wrote, it's not even worth believing. Paul wrote some incredible stuff, and he writes from an interesting place. And if you don't know the story of Paul, he's really interesting because he was not a Jesus follower at first. He was actually more of a Jesus hater. And he went out of his way to destroy the early church, and he went out of his way to chase people and hunt people down who said they were followers, because Paul was like one of those religious fundamentalist types that only sees things in certain ways, and he was part of that religious system, the same system that killed Jesus, and he's carrying on the work of the religious system to kill Jesus' followers. And he's hunting people down, and he talks about how he arrests people. It says in Acts how he arrests the men and the children and the women and puts them into prison. Paul oversees someone being tortured. He oversees someone being killed. This Paul. And then this Paul has an encounter. Something happened and he met Jesus, and Jesus was there and showed himself to Paul. And Paul experienced something that he should never experience, because instead of Paul receiving punishment and discipline and a telling off, or instead of Paul being put to death, Paul experienced a grace and a mercy and a forgiveness that he did not expect and he did not deserve. And it happened while he was on his way to find more Jesus followers to arrest them. It happened when he was in the very act of pursuing his own way of life. It happened in the very act, if you like, of him wanting to arrest more Jesus followers. And in that moment, he has an encounter with Jesus himself. And this was an unexpected grace, an unexpected mercy. Because he knew, and we all know this, sometimes people do things for us that we never deserve. It was one of those moments, when somebody just does something for you and it catches you totally off guard and you're like, oh my word. It's just so undeserved and so unexpected. That's what this moment was. And then Paul writes something. He writes this. He says, Jesus died for all. So all of us who no longer live, just live for ourselves. Basically, you have something else to live for. We now live for the one who died and was raised again. We no longer evaluate people by what they look like or by what they've done. You're no longer judged by the outside. And then he gives this little caveat, this little side comment. He says, in fact, once we even evaluated Jesus that way. So if you're not judging people by the way they look or by what they have or by what they've done, then how are you judging people? How are you evaluating people? Because we have to evaluate people somehow. And Paul goes on, he says, now the way we do it is this way. Anyone who's in Christ is now a new creature. They're a new creation. They're not what they were like before. They're a new creation, and the old has gone and the new has come. Paul is not writing a greeting card to you. Paul is telling you about his experience. I am the man who was going down this road chasing the Jesus lovers, and I was going to kill them. And I had an encounter with the risen Jesus who totally transformed and changed my life. It was an unexpected grace. It was an unexpected mercy. And it totally changed my life. And Paul's writing about his own experience here. Hey, I used to live in such a way that I judged people by what you looked like and how much money you had and how educated you were, what kind of car have you got, what's your house look like, how much are your trainers. I used to judge people that way. Maybe listen to the way you speak and you're so much more eloquent or you're so much more educated. I used to judge people that way. I could see you at the school gate and I could tell which parents were like scumbags and which were actually caring for their children. I just judge you that way. I could tell by, who lives this way. I mean, Paul's writing about the same things that all of us do every day nowadays. This is the way society works. Paul says we used to judge people by the externals. But now I have a totally new way of living life because I'm no longer judged by the externals, because if you judged me by the externals, I have no reason to stand. And Paul says it's just the grace of God alone, the unexpected, undeserved mercy. And now if anyone is in Christ, they're totally brand new. Totally brand new. And all that stuff, all that baggage, all that junk that was following you around, it's not who you are anymore. It's like it's just been cut off. There's nothing that can be brought up to shame you anymore because it's been forgiven. That's what Paul is saying. I'm a new person. The old is gone and the new has come. And then he carries on. All of this is only possible. He says it's only possible because God brought us back to himself because of what Jesus did. He's now given us this message. Paul's now writing to these people. He's saying, look, and now we've got the same message of reconciliation, this same message of bringing people back together, bringing people together and telling others to be reconciled to him. God came to reconcile the world to himself through Jesus offering forgiveness of sins. You see, the death and resurrection of Jesus is the only thing that Paul stood on. It's the only thing that changed his life. It's the only thing that changed the early followers' life. And I want to live in such a way that I no longer judge people by the externals. Don't you want to be that way too? I'm sure that you actually want to also live that way where people aren't judging you in that way. Don't you want to see that you have a value in your life and it's not based on any of those things? That's the way I want to live. That's the way I'm sure we all want to live. But that confidence is no longer based on your failures or your achievements. Having confidence is not based on how well you've done before or how rubbish you have been at it. The confidence wasn't based on that. The confidence was based on something else. The confidence was based on the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's all it was for them, the death and resurrection of Jesus. Because if someone would go out of their way to give their life for you when you least deserved it, and you had done nothing to earn it, then that changes the way you live your life entirely. Because when you receive an unexpected grace, an unexpected mercy, an unexpected gift, it changes everything. The surprise ending at the end of the film changes the way that you've been looking at everything before. I want you to live in such a way that you know your relationship with God is reconciled. There's nothing that separates you. There's nothing that holds you apart. There's nothing that keeps you at a distance. It's reconciled. It's been made right. It's been made right. Made right in a way that we never have expected because we didn't earn it. And it's only because Jesus chose to offer himself as forgiveness for sins. It's the only reason. It's the only explanation. And it's the only possibility. And when the early followers, when those first followers of Jesus went from being doubters and cynics to becoming those who placed their trust in Jesus, this was their message. This was their only message. Jesus gave his life for you, and he died and he rose again. And now we can live in a totally different way. That was their only message, because that was their experience. It's the only logical explanation for Jesus to have come back to life, and it's the only experiential explanation. That was their experience. It's the way they lived. That's a message that will change the world. Think about it. That's the only reason that a nowhere town in a nowhere part of the world, a backwater little town, Judea, Galilee, a nowhere place in the Roman Empire, a nowhere town with a bunch of nowhere uneducated people, it's the only reason that for some reason that message spread. And it spread like wildfire. Because there was a totally different way to live. And all around the world, doesn't matter what country you're from, what your ethnicity is, what language you were born speaking, and what language you learned as you got older, it doesn't matter. All around the world, the message spreads. Because there's hope for the future, because one day every tongue, every tribe, every nation, every person will be there experiencing the life of Christ. Now we're going to close this morning. We're going to do something. We're going to do this every single week as part of just a reminder and a reconciliation for what has been done by the resurrection and the gift of Jesus' life and his forgiveness. And there's this thing we're going to do is communion. If you've never done communion before, it's some bread and it's some juice. And it's a symbol. It's a reminder. And it reminds us of what Jesus has done. And we're going to play a song, and this song we're also going to be playing every week as we close this series as well. It's in a sort of an older American country style hymn, but it's got some good words. You'll like it. And I don't know if you believe in Jesus yet. I don't know if you believe who Jesus said he was. And I don't know what your obstacles are to faith. Maybe they are, well, I don't believe Jesus created the world. I don't believe God created the world in 7 days. That's okay. Because none of these early followers preached that message either. Maybe yours is this: I don't believe everybody got on a boat and then survived from this big boat. That's okay. None of these people preached that message either. Maybe you're like, well, I don't really believe in God because I'm not really sure about how this Bible stuff all works together. And they would say to you, that's okay. We didn't have the Bible either. All we had when we started out was one thing: the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's why Paul says, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, the whole thing is worthless. The whole thing is pointless. That was the one thing. And if you're exploring faith today, that's the one thing I want you to rest on. The one thing I encourage you to explore, like the sociologists and the historians and the archaeologists who have done this as well. They want to figure out why in the world this movement carried on. Something must have happened. A surprise ending must have taken place. Something happened. So that's what I'd like to encourage you to explore. The death and resurrection of Jesus, that one thing. And maybe you're in a place where you need some hope in your life, and maybe this morning coming up and sharing the communion is a moment where it reminds you that there's hope for the future, that there's something worth living for. So I'm going to pray, and we're just going to start the song. And during the song, just come whenever you feel ready, or not ready, it's fine. Just come whenever you feel ready. Just come and get some of the bread and some of the juice. And the gluten-free stuff is in the white thing, just so you know. Well, I'm just going to pray quickly, and then we'll start the song after that, guys. Thank you. Jesus, thank you so much for who you are. I just love how honest the Bible is. God, thank you so much that Paul could actually say that if you didn't come back from the dead, then actually the whole thing is pointless. How honest and refreshing. Thank you so much. And God, I just pray for every single person here today that we don't make Easter simply just a little holiday, but that we remember that it is the life-changing event that changes the whole way we live life. It's the one moment that defines every moment. Oh God, I just pray for anybody today as well who's still asking questions about what you're like. We just pray that this is a moment where they begin to discover a little bit more of what you're like, and that unexpected grace and unexpected mercy could meet them in their lives. In your name we pray. Amen.
God sent his son. They call him Jesus. He came to love, heal and forgive. He lived and died to buy my pardon. An empty grave is there to prove my Savior lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. How sweet to hold a newborn baby and feel the pride and joy he gives. But sweeter still
with pain.
And life is worth the living just because he lives.
And life is worth the living just because he lives.
I hope over the next few weeks, this becomes our foundation. Life is worth the living. No matter what comes our way, life is worth the living. We're going to just keep digging into this series and exploring it week by week. And I'd just really, really love for you to join us, because we're going to go deeper and deeper with this idea. And I don't know where you are at this moment, but if you want someone to pray with you as well, if you feel like you need some hope or some message of life being worth living in your life, we would love to pray with you. Please come speak to us at the end over here as well. Have an amazing week. Have a wonderful time together. We've got some time to spend together as well. You don't have to rush over. You can collect your children at 12 o'clock, so you got another sort of 10 to 15 minutes being here and catching up with people, and get yourself another coffee if you want as well. But love you so much, and know that we can live because Jesus lives. Amen.